Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Mindfuel, where we are making mental fitness accessible to endurance athletes so you can train your brain as consciously as you train your body. Today, we're going to take a more general look at mental fitness instead of diving into one specific fuel group because our guest, Clive Boulton, has lots of information to share on this more in general and specifically is going to help us understand how to maintain control to maximize performance. Clive, welcome to Mindfuel.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation because in the brief chats we've already had, I've learned loads. So I think there's tons of good stuff to dig into today. And
I
as
thought it was
always, before we get into the meaty bits, we like to hear a little bit about you. So can you
okay.
start by telling us who you are, not what you do, but who you are? How would a friend or partner or teammate describe you?
How would somebody describe me? Well, I come from a certain part of the UK, and we tend to have a certain type of humour that you couldn't normally publish on a podcast. So I couldn't possibly tell you exactly what they'd say, but I think they'd say I'm a fairly thoughtful guy. I'm the sort of guy that can probably turn a very simple question into a 2-hour discussion. So I hope we've got time today.
I'm going to have to keep you on the straight and narrow
Yeah.
today, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, but fairly straightforward, and a life in endurance sport from being an athlete, still being an athlete, and coaching, and that's shaped most of what I do, who I am, and of course my kind of social group as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure many people listening to this can relate to that. I certainly can. So, on that note, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship to sport and this journey in endurance athletics?
Right, with sport, well, it's been a long one, I'm kind of a certain vintage. Started in running when I was about 12 years old. Only child, looking for validation, desperate to be good at something, and I found I could run a bit. I wasn't overly talented, but I could run a bit. Through school cross country, and that really kind of lit a little bit of a flame for it. I enjoyed it as much as anything else. And I certainly wasn't any good at football, so you've got to find something to do if you can't play football and you're from the UK, right?
Absolutely.
So so I think we also place that in the context of time. We're talking now around about 1978 to 1980. And that was at the time when Steve Ovett, Sebastian Coe were starting to trade world records in the summer season. So it was easy to be inspired. It was easy to get access to athletics at that time and running in the UK. So that's kind of really how I found it. And I think from there, my relationship I'd say from there has been one where I've probably loved it a little bit more than it's loved me. But I think most people who've been involved in endurance sport would say that, I've put more in than I've got out. I've never considered myself to be the most talented guy. I ran county schools. I went to English schools cross country, ran track for the county, but never qualified for an English schools piece. So I was okay, but I wasn't fantastic. Then I've described what I'd probably, let's call it an epiphany, where over a course of a weekend, and I'm about 19 years old now, I had one positive experience and one negative experience. And that really changed my mind to athletics, right? And I stopped negotiating with myself. Behaviors changed. I doubled down in 6 weeks. I doubled my mileage. And I went on this journey of kind of really focusing on the sport over a 2-year period. And just to give you some example of that, I went from running 4 minutes for 1500 meters to 3:46. I went from running 33 minutes to 10K to running 30 minutes. I went from a 6:76-minute half marathon to a 67-minute half marathon
Wow.
within 2 years. And I suppose what that's done is it's kind of really shaped my view of performance and how the individual can relate to performance and how the individual can get the best out of themselves. The one thing I'm certainly not in the groups that I have, and I hope we'll talk about those groups as we move forward, is I'm certainly not a kind of elitist. I don't see myself as particularly good. And what I'm interested in is people, regardless of their ability, who want to get the best out of themselves. This is a good house and an open house for people that want to do that, whatever standard they are. So kind of that's me and my view and my experience of endurance sport, I
I
think.
love that. It's pretty inspiring. You changed your mindset around it, changed your training, and then huge results in really not that long of a period of
Yeah,
time. So
yeah,
very cool. So I guess that's part of the reason you're here today. So your own experience, plus now you coach a lot of top
yeah.
athletes in the UK. We're going to dive into that in a lot of detail. But just to get started, if we think about kind of the top two or three mental things that you have experienced or you've seen in your athletes that you think the top performers consistently train and then demonstrate that drives results, what would those be?
That's a really good question. And I come back to the point that I mentioned just, and that's about behaviors. And where that's most evident is in the sub-elite group that I look after. So we think about these are guys that typically focus on 800 meters. So guys in that 150 to 150, 54 bracket for 800 meters up to 65 to 69 minutes for half marathon, some others. And I've got 9 or 10 guys in this group. And what I noticed is that the guys that perform towards the top end of their capacity at any one time more consistently display a certain set of behaviors more than those that are more variable in their performance.
Interesting.
They're really consistent around a number of small habits: sleep, diet, nutrition on recovery, socializing, when they choose and how they choose to socialize. They're not monastic by any stretch, but when and how. Uh, and also what tends to exist in those relationships is a greater openness about the things that are important to them or the things that are
Mhm.
interfering or might interfere with the things that are going to determine performance. So we have foresight a lot sooner and we can plan and we can adjust for those. The guys that are more variable in their performance or perhaps not getting the best out of themselves, the notice doesn't come that early. It might be sprung on me on a Friday night with a Saturday pending. And it's the kind of different behaviors that you get. So it's the small behaviors, I think, that exist there, Laura.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's dive into that just a bit more. So you've started to mention this, but just to structure it, you kind of coach three distinct groups of athletes, which I'd love for you to describe. Let's start there. Why don't you describe who those are, and then we can talk a little bit in more depth about some of the particularly mental things that you notice
Yeah.
that are different between them.
Because they are different. The first group I have is the sub-elites we've talked about. Their age range is 19 to 31. So it's what you'd expect for that type of group. Then in the middle of the three groups, we have what I call good for age and champion marathon aspirants. Now, they might not be a marathon. They might be focusing on a half marathon, but I put them in this group. Typically, they're 35 to 60 years old. They want a good for age performance or to qualify for the championship race at a world marathon major, or qualify for Boston, qualify for London. What typifies them is that typically a lot of their life is determined by family and the day job, right? So we have kind of conflicting objectives. And what we're doing is managing time and managing their space around wellness, being in a position and being ready to train, managing the things that come up in life, and still getting them to the start line to be able to perform at their best. And the third cohort has come to me through because I've had a 30-year career in leadership in industry. I worked in IT, so I've worked for the major software and consulting houses. And at the same time, while I did that, I managed to do 10 Ironmans over 10 years, representing my country while I was doing it. I think that gives you some insight as to kind of what it takes to perform at a reasonable standard whilst you're doing a very demanding business role. So I'd started to pick up some business around people that wanted to do the same. And it's become a cohort we call the high responsibility professionals who want to pursue endurance events. And it looks like people that want to typically do some marathons, want to do Ironman, or want to do ultra events. These guys are very different, right? It's different to the other. It's different to the other groups. Certainly, I think most of the things that I'm doing with this group is getting them to slow down, getting them to try and not do too much, get him to not eat the elephant, as it was to put the cliche out there. So three very distinct groups, which keeps which keeps things interesting.
And what's their why? Why are they competing in sport and prioritizing their running?
I think it's firstly it's ambition. And I think ambition doesn't necessarily mean getting to the very top of the sport. But in what we have in athletics and running is a very healthy pyramid. So, if we focus on that pyramid, it's where are we today? Where do we think we can get to? And then that relationship that exists between ability, ambition, where we want to get to, and then, as we call it, that behavior thing, which can start to influence the things that we're going. So with those guys, it's pretty much about ambition. I'd say it's different in each of the three groups. In the middle group, in the GFAs, I think it's really multifaceted there. Stress relief, diversion from life, some level of consciousness that this is something they enjoy doing, but they should also do it because it's healthy, and they're often coming into a time of their life, mid-30s, later 30s, early 40s to their 50s, where they're probably starting to take health a little bit more seriously. If I think about the drivers for the people that have come to me in the high responsibility group, adverse medical assessments that you need to start looking after yourself, notification of that they're not where they should be and they need some balance as well. And really interestingly, protect the innocent, but I was talking to you about a guy that had to do his first triathlon at 16.5 today, founder of a business, bought and sold a couple of businesses, super successful guy. He approached me on the back of a couple of things. One was a prostate cancer diagnosis, and the other was notification that his wife wants to divorce him after he sold a business. So we can see the kind of challenges that exist in people's lives and why they might want to do something else and pursue something else as a distraction or a positive influence
Yeah.
on life.
I find it a little bit ironic that we might be talking about people who are already highly stressed, and then the races they choose are the ultra distance or the Ironman, which introduce a whole new kind of very high stress into their lives. But that's part of the reason I think it's probably valuable they have you as a coach, because you have talked to me a little bit about how you can identify in this group that because they're so used to being high achieving in all aspects of their life, that actually when they come to training, that can have an adverse effect on the quality of their training. And you have to do quite a bit of coaching there in a different way than you do with, say, those sub-elite, kind of younger, more ambitious runners. So what do you think is going on there, and how do you manage that situation?
Really good, really good question. So I think if we look at the sub elites, first of all, it's very simple, right? Running's their priority. They'll organize their day around it. They might work, they might not. They might be a student in a number of instances, but it's the priority. They're not negotiating with anything. So it's very simple. The most difficult group to manage is unquestionably the high responsibility guys. And when I say manage, I mean, if I talked about the things that I talked to you about that is really important in terms of decision making and behavior and judgment, the daily judgments, without question, this group is the most challenged in that. First of all, I found it really interesting that people have been incredibly successful in their life, people that make brilliant decisions on a daily basis and drive businesses, can actually be brought into an endurance sport environment. And the opposite is true. I don't know why it is. That's why I'm going to study it. But I think there's a couple of things at play here. I think, first of all, these are guys that have been rewarded all their lives, all their working lives, for doing more, for being bold, for being positive, for pushing through, for being demanding. They're also, if we think about perhaps some personality type that goes into that equation as well, and the people that might take up those positions. Now, the problem is when we bring that into an endurance sport background, it doesn't necessarily, when we put physiology and the central nervous system into the equation, that's not necessarily a good mix. So getting these guys, creating simple rules like you don't start a session before 5 p.m. and you don't start a session after 8 p.m. is the rule, right? We don't train the day after a red eye. That's the rule. And getting them to think about readiness. And I think the availability of tools around HRV and sleep and being able to measure some very simple metrics there has really helped them to understand readiness and when they're ready. So the other thing I have found about that group is whilst it might be challenging to start with, they learn really quickly, right? Which is indicative of the nature of the people as well. So yeah, I really enjoy that. It's different, but it has its challenges.
I can imagine. And I relate a lot to that because I used to be the one that would get off of a red eye and say, oh, to adjust to the time zone. I'm going for a run. And I look back at those days and think, oh, I was just digging the hole deeper and deeper. But I think, as you said, that's a bit what some of our corporate lives have trained us to do because there's very little recovery often built in, at least naturally. You have to use your holiday wisely, I suppose. But into the rhythms of a business. It's quarter after quarter, year after year, you go, 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 and you're constantly being pushed. And
Yeah.
for those who survive and thrive in that, yeah, I guess that translates into how they think they're going to be successful in sports. So probably some good life lessons they can take from your coaching around endurance athletics as well.
It's interesting. Yeah. I try not to let it keep me awake at night, Laura.
Something else that we spoke about was something that you called call control, an element of mental toughness that you think is probably the most important or one of the most important in endurance sports. So can you talk us through that and how you know when someone has it or doesn't and how you coach that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I really like the mental toughness model. I'm not a practitioner by any stretch of the imagination, but I do really like it. And if we consider the four C's, then if we look at control, it's about decision quality, right? In the context of the things that we've talked about. So are people making good decisions? I don't feel well, therefore perhaps I should modify my training, or perhaps I should not train, as opposed to I'm pushing through. After that, you've got, I think the next one that would relate to that best would be commitment. So that's, we make good decisions, but we continually make good decisions, and we make it not just on the day, but week after week, month after month, into year after year. And it's that month after month effect then where things start to compound and we start to really see the benefits of it. And if I go back to what I said about me earlier and finding sport and stop negotiating with myself, this is the bit, right? I stopped saying, no, I'm all right to have a few pints on the Friday. I stopped drinking at that time, right? Training became the priority. Now, I'm not saying that's right for everybody, but if you're serious about performance, then it's the continuity of good decisions is really important. I think the next thing we've not touched on yet is challenge,
Mhm.
as another one of those four C's, which, and for me in this context, it's about dealing with uncertainty. A really good example of this, I have a lady masters track runner who makes really good decisions and is very highly collaborative around those good decisions. A couple of weeks ago, we had a not a brilliant experience on a measured track session. I don't ask them to measure every track session in detail, but some I do. This is a benchmark session, and it wasn't good. Not only did she miss the targets, but she couldn't complete the session. She wasn't feeling right. And it transpires over the next couple of days that she was coming down with something. We took a couple of easy runs, then took a day off. She had a quite an important team event the following week. She phoned me, she says, do you think we should call the team manager and cancel me now? And I said, well, is it important? What's the team imperative? Do they need to know? She said, well, no, that's fine. They're aware of the situation. And they're happy to give me more time. And my view there was, well, let's take more time if we don't need to make a decision. Your training has been fantastic. This has been 2 or 3 days. You might benefit from some recovery now anyway. We were coming into an easy week. Sure enough, by the end of the week, she's out for an hour feeling much better. We don't do anything too hard on the Tuesday or Wednesday, but we go out and we get her ticking over. She feels really good by the Thursday, and she goes out and runs a PB and finishes second in a race. All credit to her. Her ability to say, I'm happy dealing with uncertainty. I'm comfortable with not making a decision. I don't have to make a decision now. So that's a kind of important element for us to deal with there as well.
It is definitely. And I think also speaks to the benefits of having a coach and someone to guide and also be a sounding board. And it's really evident to me how much of a partnership that is too, because either of you in isolation couldn't have made the best decision, but the communication that you had and the knowledge that you could bring from both sides really meant that you could do the right thing in the context.
And I think that's really important. I'm quite fortunate. I'm semi-retired out of a long corporate career, so it's quite easy for me to say I wouldn't take on more than 25 athletes. But I think this is a really important point. This is about time and availability. Coaching isn't about training plans. Right. It's the things that we're talking about here. It's helping decision making. It's helping people plan effectively. It's helping people deal with the things that they deal with and experience the things that they experience. And it's really interesting. If we think about the lady in question there, Isabella. Isabella has been with me 3 or 4 months. right? And we communicate quite frequently on this. We might have a couple of calls a week. We might have an ongoing dialogue on text about the sessions. And if we counter that then to, I have a 152, 800 meter guy, Luke, who's been with me 8 years or 7 years. We might speak every 2 or 3 weeks. And the point is that Luke's at that position where he knows what he needs to do. He has this stuff. I'll comment if on each and every important session in the week that we see. So those couple of big sessions, he'll take the observation, we'll speak if we need to, but he'll just do his thing, right? And I think it's where people are in that life cycle of, I think the other important thing there with the whole thing is I want to be the tour guide, not the taxi driver. And that's the difference between giving somebody a plan and actually taking them through the process and how to get ready and how to be ready to race.
Yeah, nice. And on the topic of racing, it
I
sounds
mean,
like you have a lot of athletes racing at a very high level, but you have a lot of athletes who might be doing some of their first races. And that's a
yeah.
place where the mental side really important and impactful, and often a lot of anxiety comes up, particularly before the first race. So what are your best pieces of advice for folks who might be facing race anxiety, especially if they haven't raced much before? How do you recommend kind of being energized but keeping the nervous system calm, and what can people take away from you to apply in their own journey?
That's a really good question, and that's been a 20-year journey for me because I'm not somebody that suffered from race anxiety for myself. I had a high level of, if you like, race excitement. I was really keen for it, but I never suffered from it. So
You know,
actually
one of my
coming.
favorite phrases, sorry to interrupt, but anxiety is excitement without breath. So it's like the same underlying feeling, but if we're not breathing and accepting it, it becomes anxiety rather than excitement. So you've kind of experienced it just on the positive side.
Yeah, just on the positive side. That's exactly it. So this 20-year journey has been interesting of discovering that and how people respond to it. And we found a mechanism. I have a couple of people in the group that's both of which are actually in the Good for Age marathon category, who really do suffer with anxiety, and it's not just necessarily new people. I have one that I knew when I was racing with when I was 20 years old. So when she came to me a couple of years ago and asked me to help her in terms of coaching, I was quite surprised that this was the angle that she really wanted me to help her with. And it's, what, it's almost the in her mind it's a frailty, and with her it was really starting to impact performance continually in different things, particularly if there was travel involved, if there was certain types of weather conditions. And what we've done to steady that is not sophisticated by any means, and I think that's part of making it easy to do. Don't make these things sophisticated. We focused on control the controllable, work out what you can influence on the sides of what's controllable, and forget the things that you can't control. So, I think we've focused on planning. So that is work out your logistics for race day, work out your preparation, look at your hotel, look at your travel arrangements so that when anxiety does kick in, it's not driving adverse behaviors. Your behaviors and your planning are already done. So you stop the situation perpetuating, and the things that can be controlled are controlled. And that's become really important for her. We have less discussions on the anxiety side than we used to. And I think the question was, how do people deal with it? And I think the simplest thing, and where we started, myself and the lady in question, is we started by writing things down, what she was anxious about, one list, and then created 3 columns. What can you control? Right. Okay. We can control those. We can deal with those. What can we influence? So an example of the controllable, your travel logistics, the hotels. What can you influence? What happens when you're traveling, time frames and things like that, to build some contingency in those types of things. What can't you control? The weather, how people choose to interact with you on the day. You can influence how you control how you interact with those. So once we had once the columns framed, the things that could cause us anxiety became much smaller. So it was as simple as that. And that would be my guidance.
I love the
Detail these
exercise
things
of
out.
writing it down, because when we get emotional, that can also just be the logic, even if there is still, yeah, some things we can't control or some things that might be anxiety inducing on that page. At least it's structured and it's not just going to fester in our brains anymore.
Yeah.
Clive, this has been a really enlightening conversation. If you could wrap us up with one succinct thought on Mental training, I'll leave it vague. What would you say?
To keep on topic, I think performance is not limited by ambition.
Mm.
It's behaviors and decision making that really limit our performance potential.
Love that. Thank you. If people want to connect with you or work with you as a coach, what's the best way for them to find you?
Easiest way is that I'm on both Instagram as Bolton Performance, and I'm on LinkedIn as Bolton Performance. Happy to continue the discussion if somebody wants to connect and message me directly from there. Perfect. Always
Super.
enjoy the conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll, as always, put all of those details in the show notes and on our website. And if this has resonated with you, please do like the video or the episode on Spotify and subscribe to us so you don't miss any future content. And of course, if you have any suggestions, comments, questions, you can put them directly on the episode or email us at connect@mindfuel.fit. Clive, thank you again so much for your time and your wisdom. I learned a lot. I think this is one I'm going to have to rewatch before my next race. And to all of you, thank you for joining and happy and healthy training. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Laura.